I never thought that the walls of my own home could feel so cold. Burlington in January was already unforgiving with wind carving through the streets like knives and snow piling up against doorways. But that morning, the chill came not from the weather outside, but from the betrayal standing right in my kitchen. My name is Hannah Sullivan, 28 years old, and I have lived in this house since the day I was born. My mother decorated the walls with soft colors, filled the shelves with secondhand books, and made sure there was always coffee brewing in the morning. After she passed, the soul of the house shifted, but I held on, believing it was still partly mine. I worked every day at the University of Vermont Medical Center as an administrative assistant. The job was not glamorous, but it paid the bills. I woke up early, brewed coffee from the old machine my mother left me, and tried to create a routine that felt stable. I spent my lunch breaks in the hospital library flipping through novels, and on weekends I volunteered at the church pantry handing out food to families who were struggling. My life was modest but steady. Or so I believed. That morning, Veronica Blake, my stepmother, handed me a piece of paper with her polished nails tapping against the edge. She had married my father when I was 14, and for years she reminded me with every gesture and every glance that I was not her daughter. Her presence was sharp like vinegar poured into milk. She looked at me with that faint smirk of hers and said, "This is just business." I unfolded the paper and felt my stomach twist. My rent was raised from $1,900 to $6,000. I read it twice, convinced I was hallucinating. I looked at her, waiting for a laugh, some sign that this was a cruel joke. None came. Chloe, her daughter from her first marriage, strolled into the room, her boots still wet from the snow. She was 24 younger than me, but carried herself with the entitlement of a queen who had never worked for anything in her life. She leaned against the counter and rolled her eyes. "If you cannot afford it, move out. Simple." The casual cruelty in her tone hit me harder than the numbers on the page. My throat closed up as I tried to argue. I said, "You cannot be serious. That is more than triple. How could anyone afford that?" My father stepped into the doorway holding his morning coffee as though he had been waiting for his cue. David Sullivan, my own father, the man who once held me steady on the ice rink when I was a child, now stood as cold as the frost on the windows. "Your stepmother's decision is fair. Respect it." His voice was calm, detached, as if he were a judge delivering a sentence. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the paper back at them and demand how they could do this to me in the middle of winter, in the very house my mother had cherished. Instead, I stood frozen, watching Veronica's smirk deepen, Chloe's satisfied tilt of the head, and my father's silence. It was not just about the rent. It was about control. They wanted me gone. They wanted to erase my mother's presence, to push me out until the only voices in this house were theirs. The shock punched through my chest, then shame spread like wildfire. $6,000. That was more than 3 times what I earned after paying taxes and insurance. I thought about the hours I spent organizing schedules at the hospital, dealing with frustrated patients and overwhelmed doctors. I thought about how every cent of my paycheck had been carefully planned, how I saved coins in a jar just to buy secondhand novels. And now, in one stroke of a pen, Veronica had made all of it impossible. I asked why. My voice cracked. Veronica's reply was sharp. "Because that is what the market demands." She did not care about the market. She cared about breaking me. Chloe laughed under her breath. "If you are too soft to handle life, maybe you should pack your bags." My father did not flinch. He did not defend me. He did not even look at me. The silence between us weighed heavier than the snow pressing against the roof. I wanted to remind him of the times my mother stayed up late sewing his shirts when money was tight, the meals she cooked from scraps, the love she poured into this house. But his eyes were already closed to all of that. They had drawn a line, and I was standing on the wrong side. My heart hammered as I clutched the paper, the numbers burning into my vision. 6,000. I could feel the storm rising in me. Anger surged, but grief pressed against it and humiliation forced my head down. I wanted to disappear, yet something inside me whispered no. I swallowed the tears, feeling the first spark of defiance kindle in the ashes of my shock. That morning, in my own kitchen with my father's silence stabbing deeper than any word, with my stepmother's smirk searing itself into my memory, and with Chloe's laughter echoing like a slap, I realized that this was not the end of my story. This was the beginning of a fight I never asked for but could no longer avoid. I stood in the kitchen holding that paper until my fingers went numb. Outside the window, the snow kept falling silent and relentless like time itself. I had always believed that if I worked hard enough, if I stayed polite, if I kept the peace, my place in this house would remain secure. Now the truth stared back at me in bold black ink. They did not want me here. They had probably never wanted me here. I walked back to my small room at the end of the hall, the one my mother had painted pale yellow. The color had faded, but I kept it as a reminder of her. My desk was piled with hospital files I had brought home, patient schedules, volunteer forms from the pantry, a library book waiting to be returned. My life was simple, built from careful routines. I woke at 5 each morning to brew coffee in the old machine my mother left me. I wore the same navy slacks and cream sweaters to work, rotating them like clockwork. I stopped at the library on my lunch breaks, losing myself in novels about faraway places. On Saturdays, I put on my heavy boots and joined the volunteers at the church, handing out food and listening to stories from people who had lost everything. Those moments of quiet service were what kept me human in a world that often felt cruel. And now, here I was about to be pushed out of the only place that felt like home. My father had not followed me to my room. He had not knocked to ask if I was okay. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the framed photo of my mother on the nightstand. She was smiling at the camera, her hair windblown from the lake. My throat tightened. She would have known what to say. She would have told me to stand my ground to protect what mattered. But she was gone, and I was alone. I heard footsteps in the hall. Chloe's voice drifted through the door, sing-song and mocking. "Better start packing, Hannah. The snow is lovely this time of year." The sound of her laughter moved away. My hands trembled. Rage and humiliation mixed until I felt sick. For years, I had accepted the small humiliations, the subtle digs, the constant reminders that I was a guest in my own home. I paid rent to my stepmother while Chloe lived rent-free. I cooked my own meals while they dined out. I patched the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom while Veronica bought herself another handbag. I had told myself it was temporary, that one day my father would remember whose daughter I was, that Veronica would soften, that Chloe would grow up. That morning stripped away the last of those illusions. My phone buzzed with a reminder from the hospital about a meeting later that day. Life outside these walls kept moving. Patients would come and go. Forms would need signing, and the pantry would still open on Saturday. But inside, my world had cracked. I pressed my palms against my knees and forced myself to breathe. My mother's voice echoed faintly in memory. "Protect this home, Hannah. They will try to take it from you." I had never understood why she said that. Now I did. I opened my nightstand drawer and found the old key on a faded ribbon, the one my mother had given me years ago. TD Bank was etched into the brass. She had told me it was for important papers, but I had never checked. My chest tightened as if the key itself was whispering possibilities. But before any plan could form, another noise jolted me. A hard knock at my door. Chloe's voice again, but sharper now. "Mom says you have until the end of the month to decide. Pay up or get out." Then the sound of something heavy scraping. When I opened the door, she was dragging one of my boxes toward the front hall. Veronica stood at the top of the stairs, watching like a queen surveying her subject. I grabbed the box from Chloe. "Stop it!" Her grin widened. "You heard, Mom. If you cannot afford it, move out." She shoved the door closed behind me. The latch clicked. I tried the handle. It was locked. Cold air leaked through the frame where she had opened it to toss my belongings onto the porch. Snowflakes swirled in through the gap, landing on my bare hands. I stepped outside to retrieve my things, and the door shut behind me with a sound that felt final. The cold hit like a slap. Snow clung to my hair and coat as I bent to pick up my box. My breath rose in pale clouds. For a moment, I stood there on the porch, the sky gray above me, my father's house behind me, my life scattered at my feet. My hands shook not just from the cold, but from the realization settling in. They had done it. They had actually locked me out into the snow. Through the window, I saw Chloe smirking. Veronica turned away, satisfied. My father's silhouette flickered in the hall, but he did not open the door. Shame burned through me. Then another sound cut through the wind. A door opening next door. Mrs. O'Connor, my elderly neighbor, stepped out wrapped in a thick cardigan. She had watched me grow up, always waving from her porch. Now she hurried across the snow, her boots crunching. "Hannah, dear, what on earth are you doing out here without a coat? Come inside right now." She took the box from my arms and guided me into her warm living room. The scent of chamomile tea and old wood enveloped me. I sank into her armchair, my fingers stiff from the cold, my heart still racing. Mrs. O'Connor clucked her tongue. I heard raised voices. What happened? Tears stung my eyes, but I forced them back. My stepmother raised my rent to $6,000. My stepsister locked me out. My father did nothing. She pressed a steaming mug into my hands. "Honey, this is not right. This is not how family treats family." The warmth seeped into my palms. For the first time that morning, I felt the edge of the storm inside me soften just enough to breathe. Maybe I was not completely alone after all. Sitting in Mrs. O'Connor's warm living room, the shock slowly turned into something else, a heavy ache that felt older than that morning. She placed a blanket over my shoulders while I tried to stop shivering, but the chill was not just from the snow. It came from years of being treated like an outsider in my own family. I closed my eyes, and memories rose like ghosts, reminders of how this all began. When I was 14, my mother grew sick. I watched her fade day by day, her once strong hands trembling as she tried to brush my hair or sign my school forms. The night she died, the house felt different, emptied of warmth, filled with silence. Only weeks later, my father brought Veronica into our lives. At first, she smiled at me sweet and calculated, but quickly the sweetness soured. She rearranged furniture painted over my mother's colors and acted as if the home had always belonged to her. I remember standing in the doorway of the living room, watching her box up my mother's books. She told me I should be grateful that she was bringing order to a messy life. I swallowed my protest then, but I never forgot the sting. Soon after the rules began, I was to pay rent for my room once I started college, though I still lived at home. Veronica insisted it was only fair that Chloe needed new clothes and private lessons. I worked nights in the campus library and weekends at a cafe just to hand over money to my stepmother while Chloe flaunted her shopping bags. My father rarely said no to her. When I complained, he said it was just practical. I learned to carry my resentment in silence. Through the years, I built a life of my own, though it never felt entirely mine. I earned my degree from the community college and took the administrative job at the University of Vermont Medical Center. The work was repetitive, managing appointments, filing insurance forms, scheduling procedures, but it paid regularly and gave me a sense of stability. Every morning I told myself that stability was enough. Still, at the back of my mind, I carried the weight of those years, the memory of Veronica's smirk, the way Chloe tossed her hair as if my efforts were invisible, and the quiet betrayal of my father's silence. That morning, when Veronica raised the rent to $6,000, it was not just a number on a page. It was every slight, every cold word, every reminder that I was tolerated but never loved. And when Chloe locked me out into the snow, it was the physical proof of what I had always feared, that they would one day push me entirely out of my own home. Mrs. O'Connor's voice broke through my thoughts. "Hannah, dear, you cannot let them do this to you. Families are supposed to protect, not destroy." I nodded, but my throat was tight. I wanted to believe her, yet the years of humiliation whispered otherwise. The blanket was warm, the tea soothing, but deep inside, the old ache was shifting into something sharper. I realized I was tired of waiting for my father to defend me, tired of hoping Veronica would change, tired of pretending Chloe would ever see me as her sister. Something had to break, and for the first time I felt it might not be me. The next morning I returned to the house to gather some of my belongings, though the idea of walking back inside felt like walking into enemy territory. The snow had hardened into ice overnight, crunching beneath my boots as I climbed the steps. When I tried the front door, it was locked, though I had lived there all my life. I knocked. Chloe opened it just enough to show her smirk. Back already. I thought you would be smart enough to start packing. Her eyes glittered with satisfaction. I pushed past her before she could slam it again, heading to my room without a word. Veronica was in the kitchen on the phone, her voice dripping with false charm as she talked about property values and rental markets. I knew that tone. She was planning something bigger than just raising my rent. My father sat at the table reading the newspaper. He did not look up as I passed, did not ask if I was all right after being locked out in the snow the day before. His silence was more brutal than Chloe's laughter. In my room, I packed quietly, folding sweaters and sliding books into boxes. Every item felt like another memory being stripped away. My mother's photograph on the nightstand, the quilt she sewed during her chemo treatments, the coffee machine in the corner that sputtered but still worked, all of it seemed to carry her voice whispering not to let them erase me. But downstairs, the noise grew louder. Veronica's phone call ended and she called out, "Hannah, remember, you have until the end of the month." Chloe laughed, adding, "If you even last that long." Their voices followed me through the walls, sharp and mocking. When I carried the first box outside, the cold air hit, but it was almost a relief compared to the suffocating chill inside. Mrs. O'Connor was watching from her porch again. She walked over her scarf, flapping in the wind. "Did they throw you out again?" I shook my head, though the truth was not much better. "They are making it impossible for me to stay." Her eyes narrowed the way they did when she used to scold her grandchildren. "That is cruelty plain and simple. You have rights, Hannah. Do not forget that." Her words struck something inside me. For so long, I had accepted Veronica's rules as unchangeable, but maybe they were not. That evening, alone in my car parked outside the hospital after my shift, I let the thoughts unravel. I could keep paying until I was broke, surrendering piece by piece until there was nothing left of me. Or I could fight. The word sounded strange in my mind, foreign but also electric. I remembered my mother's warning. "Protect this home. They will try to take it from you." She had known. She had seen what was coming. The paper in my hand yesterday was not just a bill. It was the proof that the battle she had warned me about had finally begun. 2 days later, the tension in the house snapped into something uglier. I had just returned from a long shift at the hospital, my hands aching from typing schedules and filing records all day. I walked into the kitchen to heat a bowl of soup, but Chloe was already there, sprawled across a chair with her phone in her hand. She looked up, her expression hard. "You still here? Thought you would have figured it out by now." I ignored her and reached for the cupboard. She shoved the door shut before I could open it. "Mom says you are done freeloading. Pay the $6,000 or get out tonight." I stepped back, my voice shaking. "That is not legal. You cannot just throw me out." Her grin widened. "Watch me." She grabbed the bowl I had set on the counter and hurled it toward the sink. It shattered pieces skidding across the tile. My father walked in just as the fragments scattered. For one heartbeat, I thought he might scold her, that he might remind her that I was his daughter, that this was still my home. Instead, he sighed, rubbed his forehead, and muttered, "Enough noise. Do not drag this out, Hannah." My chest tightened. Chloe laughed, brushing past me with deliberate force, her shoulder hitting mine. As she disappeared upstairs, Veronica entered her coat, draped elegantly, smelling of expensive perfume. She surveyed the shards on the floor and then me standing frozen. She did not ask who broke the bowl. She did not ask if I was hurt. She only said, "We expect full payment by the 1st." Her heels clicked as she followed Chloe up the stairs. I bent down to pick up the pieces, my fingers trembling. A shard cut my palm and a thin line of red appeared. I stared at it, stunned, before rinsing my hand under cold water. The sting was sharp, but not as sharp as the realization pressing into me. They were not just raising rent. They were trying to break me piece by piece until I left on my own. That night, lying in bed with my bandaged hand throbbing, I stared at the ceiling. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the heater. My father's footsteps passed once in the hall, but he did not pause at my door. He had chosen his side. I felt the weight of betrayal heavier than ever, but beneath it, another feeling pulsed. Anger. Anger that they believed they could erase me. that they could erase my mother, that they could silence me into leaving. I closed my eyes and whispered to the darkness, "Not yet. You will not win this easily." The final straw came the following weekend. I had left early in the morning to volunteer at the church pantry, sorting boxes of canned food, stacking bread loaves, and handing out milk to families who lined up in the cold. Those mornings gave me peace, a reminder that kindness still existed in the world. When I returned home, cheeks stung pink from the wind, I found my suitcase sitting on the porch. My clothes were spilling out snowflakes, already dampening the fabric. For a long moment, I just stared, unable to breathe. Then the door opened. Chloe leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "You were not here, so we thought we would help you get started." Her voice was casual, as if she were doing me a favor. Behind her, Veronica appeared with a cup of tea, calm as ever. "We agreed it was time, Hannah. Consider this encouragement." Encouragement! The word burned. I stepped forward, shoving the suitcase back inside, my voice breaking. "This is my home. You cannot just throw me out." Veronica's gaze sharpened, her smile cold. "You are occupying space you do not deserve." My father's shadow appeared in the hall. He said nothing. He turned back toward the living room as though the sight of me begging was too tedious to watch. Chloe snatched a sweater from the suitcase and tossed it onto the porch. Snowflakes clung to the wool. I lunged forward to grab at my fingers, stiff from the cold. For one wild second, I wanted to scream, to break something, to shake them all until they finally saw me. But then the door slammed shut. The lock clicked. I stood outside, suitcase half in, half out, the cold air slicing through my coat. My chest heaved with fury and humiliation. Then I heard the crunch of footsteps on the sidewalk. Mrs. O'Connor was there again, walking carefully with her cane. Her eyes widened when she saw me shivering on the porch with my belongings scattered. "Oh, Hannah, this has gone too far." She helped me drag the suitcase into her own house, muttering under her breath about shame and cruelty. Inside her cozy living room, she sat me down and made me tea again. I felt the warmth seep through me, but this time it did not quiet the storm inside. Instead, it fueled it. I realized something crucial. If they wanted me broken, they would not get the satisfaction. I was done being silent. I was done hoping my father would wake up and defend me. I was done waiting for Veronica and Chloe to change. The fight my mother warned me about had arrived, and I would not run from it. The night after Chloe tossed my suitcase onto the porch, I sat in Mrs. O'Connor's living room long after she had gone to bed. The old clock ticked steadily on the mantel, the air smelled of chamomile and cedarwood, and outside, the snow whispered against the windows. I could not sleep. My thoughts churned, replaying every word Veronica had said, every smirk from Chloe, every moment of silence from my father. Then, like a thread pulled loose from memory, I remembered something I had buried for years. The key. My mother had given it to me when I was 17, just before she grew too weak to leave her bed. She had pressed it into my palm with a look that was both fierce and fragile. "Keep this safe, Hannah. One day you may need it." She never explained what it opened, and in the chaos of her illness and funeral, I had tucked it away, tied to a faded ribbon at the back of my nightstand drawer. For years, I carried it with me through every move, every attempt at independence, but I never dared to use it. That night, with Veronica's voice still echoing in my ears, the memory of the key became impossible to ignore. I whispered to the dark, "What did you want me to find, Mom?" The next morning, after thanking Mrs. O'Connor for her kindness, I drove to the small branch of TD Bank on Main Street in Burlington. The key felt heavy in my pocket as I pushed through the glass doors, my breath still visible in the winter air. Inside, the warm hum of machines and quiet footsteps on the polished floor contrasted sharply with the storm inside me. I approached the clerk and showed the key. Her eyebrows lifted. "This looks like a safe deposit key. Do you know the box number?" I shook my head, nerves pricking my skin. She typed into her computer, then nodded. "Yes, we have one registered under your mother's name, Margaret Sullivan." My throat tightened at the sound of her name. She led me to a quiet room, the walls lined with steel drawers. The manager arrived with a second key, and together we opened the small, heavy box. Inside lay a stack of documents neatly arranged in a folder and a sealed envelope with my name written in my mother's handwriting. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. The scent of old paper and faint lavender drifted upward. I had not seen her writing in years. I pressed the envelope to my chest, afraid that opening it would change everything, but knowing I could not turn back now. I sat at the small table in the bank's private room with the envelope trembling in my hands. The manager left politely, giving me privacy. For a long time, I stared at my name written in my mother's careful script. Hannah. Just that single word, but it felt like she was in the room with me, urging me to be strong. I slid my finger under the seal and opened it slowly. Inside was a letter written on lined stationery I recognized from her old desk. My dearest Hannah, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to protect you myself. You must know this house is meant for you. I saved and worked to make sure of that. People may try to tell you otherwise, but do not believe them. You are my daughter, and this home is your inheritance. Protect it, Hannah. They will try to take it from you. My eyes blurred with tears. She had known. She had seen what was coming even before she was gone. Beneath the letter were legal documents, official papers stamped with seals. As I turned through them, my breath caught. My mother had placed her share of the house into a trust under my name. Half the property was legally mine. Veronica had no right to demand rent, no right to threaten eviction. And yet, she had been doing it for years, feeding off my silence. At the bottom of the stack, I found bank statements showing loans and withdrawals linked to Veronica. She had taken money against the house, hiding it under her own accounts. Rage burned through my chest. She had not only stolen from me, she had risked the very roof over our heads for her own luxuries. I stuffed the papers back into the folder, clutching it as if someone might snatch it away at any moment. Walking out of the bank, the cold air slapped my face, but I barely felt it. For the first time in years, I had proof. Proof that I was not crazy, not powerless, not the unwanted guest they painted me to be. Still, the weight of it was heavy. I knew I could not face Veronica and Chloe alone. I needed help, someone who understood the law, someone I could trust. And then I remembered a name, one my mother had whispered in her final weeks, Michael Turner. He had been her friend long before Veronica appeared, a lawyer based in Boston. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, searched his number, and prayed he would remember her. The phone rang twice before a steady male voice answered. Turner Law Offices, this is Michael. My throat tightened. I almost hung up, unsure how to begin, but then I heard my mother's voice in memory, urging me forward. I said quietly, My name is Hannah Sullivan. You were friends with my mother, Margaret. There was a long pause, then a shift in his tone, softer, almost surprised. Hannah. Yes, I remember. How are you holding up? The words nearly undid me. I explained everything in a rush, the raised rent, the threats being locked outside, and finally the discovery of the safe deposit box. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was silence, then his voice firm and calm. Your mother prepared for this. If you have the documents, you have leverage. Veronica cannot just erase you. I felt something I had not in weeks. Hope. I asked if he could help me, and he said yes without hesitation. I will need copies of everything. We will build a case. Do not confront them directly yet. Let me guide you. Relief flooded through me, but also fear. This was real now. I was not just nursing private anger. I was preparing for battle. After we hung up, I sat in my car, gripping the phone. Outside, Burlington bustled with normal life people carrying groceries, children pulling sleds, couples laughing under scarves. To them, it was an ordinary winter day. For me, it was the day the tide shifted. That evening, back at Mrs. O'Connor's house, I spread the papers across her dining table. She leaned over them, adjusting her glasses, muttering under her breath. Well, well, looks like your stepmother has been playing with fire. I told her about Michael. She smiled, satisfied. Good. You will not face this alone, Hannah. She made us tea and listened as I laid out everything I remembered, every detail of Veronica's manipulations, every cruel laugh from Chloe, every silence from my father. For the first time, I felt the story take shape, not just as pain, but as evidence, as truth that could be carried into the light. Before bed, I reread my mother's letter. Protect this home. They will try to take it from you." Her handwriting curved across the page like a hand reaching through time. I pressed my palm against it, promising silently that I would not fail her. I had been passive too long. Now, with Michael's guidance and Mrs. O'Connor's support, I was ready to step into the fight. The following week blurred into a storm of planning. Each day, I went to the hospital smiling politely at patients and answering phones as if my world were not collapsing, then came home to Mrs. O'Connor's warm kitchen to pore over documents. Michael called every evening, guiding me through each page, pointing out signatures, noting dates, explaining the legal weight of every stamp. He spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had seen battles like this before. "Hannah," he said one night, "this case is stronger than you think. Your mother safeguarded her portion. Veronica cannot override that no matter how confident she acts." Still, I was terrified. I had lived for years believing Veronica held all the power. Shaking that belief felt like trying to wake from a nightmare. Michael reminded me again and again, "The law is on your side." But the law did not silence Chloe's laughter or stop Veronica's smirk. One evening, as I left the hospital, I saw Chloe waiting near my car. She leaned against the door, arms folded. "Heard you have been running to the neighbors," she sneered, planning to whine to anyone who will listen. I told her to move. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Face it, Hannah, you are nothing here. Mom owns Dad, and Dad owns this house. No letter from your dead mother will change that." The words sliced deep, but I refused to flinch. I unlocked the car, forcing her to step aside. As I slid behind the wheel, I looked her in the eye. "You will regret underestimating me." For the first time, her smirk faltered just a flicker, but I saw it. Driving away, my hands shook on the steering wheel. Fear pulsed in my veins, but underneath it something else stirred. Strength. That night, I told Michael about the encounter. He was quiet, then said firmly, "Do not engage her. Let me handle the fight where it matters. Every insult, every attempt to rattle you, that is their desperation showing." I held on to his words. Back in Mrs. O'Connor's living room, the documents spread across the table looked less like paper and more like weapons. Proof of ownership records of Veronica's secret loans, even a copy of my mother's will naming me as beneficiary. I traced my mother's name with my finger. For years, I had let silence define me. Now, armed with her foresight and Michael's counsel, I felt the shape of change forming. The war was coming, and for the first time, I was not afraid to meet it. The turning point came on a gray Saturday morning when Michael drove up from Boston to meet me in person. He arrived at Mrs. O'Connor's house carrying a leather briefcase, his coat dusted with snow. He shook my hand firmly, studying me with kind but steady eyes. "You look just like your mother," he said softly. The words made my chest tighten, but they also gave me strength. We sat at the dining table, papers spread before us. Michael moved with precision, marking sections with yellow tabs explaining strategy. "This trust document is key, Hannah. It proves you inherited half the property. And these loan records show Veronica used the house for personal gain. Together, they paint a clear picture of misconduct." I listened to my pen scratching notes, my nerves humming. For the first time, the battle did not feel like a vague storm, but a path with steps I could follow. Midway through, Mrs. O'Connor brought us tea and biscuits, muttering about how wicked people always dig their own holes. Michael smiled politely, then turned serious again. "They will fight back, Hannah. They will smear your name, try to make you look unstable or ungrateful. You must be ready." I nodded, my stomach twisting. I thought of Chloe's sneers, Veronica's cold smile, my father's silence. I imagined them all in a courtroom, their eyes on me. Fear prickled my skin, but Michael's presence steadied me. He told me we would file motions, request an injunction, prepare witness statements. He asked if I knew anyone who could testify to the way Veronica and Chloe treated me. Without hesitation, I thought of Mrs. O'Connor. She had seen it all. She agreed instantly, her voice fierce. "I will not let them ruin that girl." By the time Michael left that evening, the plan was in motion. I walked him to his car, snow crunching beneath our boots, the Vermont air sharp and cold. He clasped my shoulder before leaving. "Your mother trusted you with this. Trust yourself, Hannah." I watched his taillights disappear down the street, my breath rising in clouds. The fear was still there, but it no longer ruled me. I felt the ground shift beneath me, not as ice cracking, but as a foundation being laid. The discovery of those papers, the letter from my mother, and Michael's guidance had transformed me. I was no longer the girl standing outside in the snow shivering while my family laughed. I was someone with proof, with allies, with a voice ready to be heard. The fight ahead would be brutal, but for the first time, I believed I could win. The storm finally broke when a thick envelope arrived in the mail. Mrs. O'Connor had collected it from my father's porch before Chloe could intercept it and handed it to me with a grim expression. Inside was a formal notice signed by Veronica's lawyer declaring that I had 30 days to vacate the property or face eviction proceedings. My heart pounded as I read the words. Even after discovering my rights, even after speaking with Michael, seeing the threat in writing sent a wave of dread through me. They were serious. They were not backing down. That night, I called Michael, my voice shaking. He told me calmly that this was expected, that they were moving first to intimidate me. "Hannah, you have the stronger case. Do not panic. We will file our own response." Still fear clung to me. At work, I struggled to focus. The hospital corridors blurred as patients asked questions I barely heard. I kept picturing Veronica in court, smug and confident Chloe whispering, "Lies," my father sitting silent. By the time I returned to Mrs. O'Connor's house, I was trembling with frustration. She sat me down, poured tea, and said firmly, "Hannah, you are not alone in this. Let me speak if needed. I have seen what they did to you." She was right. She had been there the day Chloe locked me out, the day my suitcase lay in the snow. Her testimony would matter. Michael agreed, adding her to the list of witnesses. Meanwhile, Chloe began spreading rumors around town. At the grocery store, I overheard two women whispering, saying I had refused to pay rent, that I was lazy, that I was draining my father's resources. The humiliation burned, but it only steeled my resolve. I told Michael, and he warned me it would get worse. "They will try to destroy your reputation. Stay focused on the evidence." One evening, as I left the hospital, a coworker pulled me aside. "Is it true, Hannah, that your family is kicking you out?" My face flushed, but before I could answer, she squeezed my hand. "I do not believe a word of it. You are one of the hardest working people I know." Her support reminded me that not everyone would fall for Veronica's lies. Slowly, the fear began to shift into something else. Determination. The eviction notice was not the end. It was the beginning of the fight my mother had prepared me for. I laid the papers on the table beside her letter and whispered, "I will not let you down, Mom." The build-up to battle had begun, and this time I was ready. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope stretched over a storm. Every morning, I forced myself through the hospital routine, answering phones, filing records, smiling at patients who had no idea that my own life was unraveling. Every evening, I returned to Mrs. O'Connor's dining table where documents, highlighters, and Michael's notes piled higher. He called daily, sometimes late into the night, his steady voice cutting through my exhaustion. "Hannah, this is where you hold firm. They are trying to rattle you. Do not let them." But it was hard not to feel rattled when Chloe's voice carried across town like poison. She told anyone who would listen that I was ungrateful that my stepmother had taken me in when my mother died, that I had turned into a parasite. At the library, I overheard her words floating through the aisles. At the church pantry, a volunteer asked me hesitantly if I was all right. I nodded, keeping my face calm, but inside, anger burned. Veronica, meanwhile, carried herself with the confidence of a woman who believed she had already won. She showed up at church on Sunday in a fur-lined coat, whispering into ears, tilting her head in mock sympathy whenever someone glanced my way. My father walked beside her silent, his eyes averted when they landed on me. Each time, the betrayal cut deeper. Still, I clung to the papers, to the truth my mother had secured. Michael prepared motions to counter their eviction threat, filing them with the courthouse in Burlington. He explained that once the documents were reviewed, the judge would see that half the property was mine by law, yet waiting for the system to move felt unbearable. One icy evening, returning from work, I found Chloe standing on the porch again. She blocked my path, her breath visible in the cold. She smirked. 30 days, Hannah. Tick-tock. I brushed past her, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction, but inside my chest, a fire roared. That night, I sat by the window in Mrs. O'Connor's house, staring at the snow falling in thick sheets. I thought of my mother's voice, of Michael's advice, of the community that had begun to whisper, watching the conflict unfold. I realized something important. This was no longer just about me. It was about showing everyone what happened when silence met cruelty, when truth met lies. Veronica and Chloe believed they could control the story, but I was determined to make sure the truth came out, no matter how long it took. The tension reached a breaking point one night when Michael called with news. He had filed for an injunction to stop the eviction until the court could review the trust documents. His tone was calm, but I could hear the undercurrent of urgency. "Hannah, this means they cannot legally force you out for now. You are protected until we appear in court." Relief swept over me, but it was fragile, like glass that could shatter at any moment. I thanked him, then hung up and sat in silence. Protected. The word sounded almost foreign after weeks of feeling hunted. Still, Veronica and Chloe did not slow down. If anything, they escalated. The next morning when I drove to work, I noticed a flyer taped to the community board outside the grocery store. In bold letters, it said, "Some people think they deserve houses they never earned." Beneath it was a blurry photo of me carrying boxes. My stomach turned. Chloe's handiwork was obvious. She wanted to humiliate me, to make the town see me as a thief. I ripped the flyer down my hands, shaking, and stuffed it into my bag. At the hospital that day, whispers followed me in the corridors. Yet when one of the doctors stopped me, he shook his head. "Ignore them, Hannah. You have always been honest and hardworking." That reminder steadied me. Not everyone believed their lies. That evening, Mrs. O'Connor sat across from me, her lips pressed tight as I showed her the flyer. "Do not let them crush you, Hannah. People see through cruelty." I nodded, but inside, the weight grew heavier. Later, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought of my father. He had not spoken to me directly in weeks. When I caught glimpses of him at church or in town, he turned away. I wondered if he had convinced himself that silence made him neutral. But his silence was the loudest betrayal of all. I realized then that I was no longer grieving just for my mother. I was grieving for the father I thought I had. And yet, even in the grief, the determination sharpened. They had attacked me in private, then in public. The only place left was the courtroom. That was where the truth would stand. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "Let them laugh now. Soon, everyone will know what they have done." The final weeks before court felt like the longest of my life. Each day the air grew heavier, as if the snow clouds above Burlington mirrored the weight pressing on my chest. Michael sent me drafts of our filings, highlighted sections, and prepared witness statements. Mrs. O'Connor sat with me at her kitchen table, rehearsing her testimony, her voice trembling at first, but growing stronger each time. She would describe the night I was locked out in the snow, the suitcase tossed on the porch, the way Veronica and Chloe laughed while I stood shivering. Her words would paint the truth. Meanwhile, Veronica paraded through town as if nothing could touch her. She spoke sweetly at church, donated to local drives, smiled at neighbors as though she were the picture of generosity. Chloe followed her like a shadow, whispering poison into every ear she found. I kept my head down, but inside, the storm built. One evening, I saw Veronica standing outside the courthouse steps, speaking to a reporter. My heart clenched as I caught the words. "This is just a misunderstanding. We have always cared for Hannah. She is confused." My blood boiled. I wanted to run forward to shout the truth, but Michael's advice echoed. "Save it for the courtroom. Do not waste your voice where it will be twisted." That night, I returned to Mrs. O'Connor's and spread the papers across the table once more. The trust document, the bank statements showing Veronica's secret loans, my mother's will with my name written clearly. These were not just papers. They were shields and swords, proof that truth still mattered. As the hearing approached, my nerves rattled like loose glass. Sleep came in fragments. At the hospital, my coworkers offered quiet support, leaving small notes on my desk. "Stay strong, Hannah. We believe in you." Those words mattered more than they knew. On the eve of the hearing, I stood at my mother's grave. Snow blanketed the ground, muffling the world into silence. I brushed the powder from her headstone and whispered, "Tomorrow I fight for us." I promise I will not let them take what you protected." My breath lingered in the frozen air. For a long moment, I stood there, my hand pressed to the stone, feeling the echo of her strength in my bones. When I walked back to Mrs. O'Connor's house, the fear was still there, but it was different now. It no longer ruled me. Tomorrow, everything would be laid bare. Tomorrow, the storm would break in public. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and sharp, the kind of Vermont winter day where the sky seemed carved from ice. I woke before dawn in Mrs. O'Connor's spare room, my stomach a knot of nerves. I dressed carefully, pulling on the navy blazer I saved for job interviews, the one that made me feel just a little taller. My hands trembled as I brushed my hair back, but when I looked in the mirror, I whispered to myself, "You are not their victim anymore. You are here to speak the truth." Mrs. O'Connor insisted on coming with me. She walked slowly with her cane, but her grip on my arm was steady as stone. Outside, Michael waited beside his car, his breath misting in the air. He gave me a nod that said everything we were ready. The courthouse in Burlington loomed gray against the snow, its steps crowded with people. I had not expected so many. Neighbors, coworkers, even local reporters gathered curious about the case that had trickled through town gossip. As we climbed the steps, I caught sight of Veronica and Chloe standing together in sleek coats, their faces calm, almost smug. My father stood a few paces behind them, his eyes fixed on the ground. When Veronica saw me, her lips curved in a smile that was all teeth. I forced myself to meet her gaze without flinching. Inside the courtroom, the air was hushed heavy with expectation. The judge sat high above his gavel, resting on the desk. We took our seats at the plaintiff's table. Michael leaned close, his voice low. "Breathe, Hannah. Let them show who they really are." Across the aisle, Veronica whispered to her lawyer, her posture relaxed as if the outcome were already in her pocket. Chloe scrolled on her phone, careless and cocky. My father avoided my eyes entirely. The bailiff called the court to order. The case was announced. My pulse thundered as the proceedings began. Veronica's lawyer opened first, painting her as a generous stepmother who had simply asked for fair rent. He called me ungrateful, suggested I was trying to avoid responsibility, claimed I had twisted the story for sympathy. His words were slick, rehearsed, dripping with condescension. I clenched my fists beneath the table, but Michael touched my arm lightly, reminding me to wait. Then it was our turn. Michael rose, his presence calm yet commanding. He spoke of my mother, of the trust documents, of the legal truth that half the property was mine. He laid out the papers one by one, sliding them across for the judge to see each stamp and signature shining like a shield. The courtroom shifted, whispers rising. For the first time that morning, I saw Veronica's smile flicker. Michael's voice carried through the courtroom with measured strength. He explained how my mother had anticipated conflict, how she had placed her share of the property into a trust in my name to secure my future. He showed the will, her handwriting clear and final. He then shifted to the bank records, the loans Veronica had taken against the house for her own spending debts hidden behind a facade of respectability. Each document struck like a hammer. The judge studied them carefully, his expression unreadable. Then Michael called the first witness. Mrs. O'Connor rose slowly from her seat, leaning on her cane. The courtroom hushed as she took the stand. She may have been small and elderly, but her voice rang clear. She described the morning she saw me locked out into the snow suitcase on the porch, Chloe smirking from behind the door. She told how she had brought me inside, shivering, humiliated, my belongings scattered. Her words painted the picture vividly, and I saw the jurors shift in their seats, their faces hardening. Veronica's lawyer tried to rattle her, suggesting her memory was faulty, that she was biased as a neighbor, but Mrs. O'Connor lifted her chin. "I may be old, sir, but I know what cruelty looks like. I saw it with my own eyes." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I felt my throat tighten with gratitude. When she stepped down, she gave me a small nod as if passing me her strength. Next, Michael called me to the stand. My knees trembled as I walked forward, but when I sat and looked out over the room, something shifted inside me. For years, I had swallowed silence. Now, I had the chance to tell the truth. Michael asked gentle questions first. I spoke of my mother, of the life she built, of the letter she left for me. I explained how Veronica had forced me to pay rent, even during college, how Chloe mocked me, how my father stood by in silence. My voice cracked when I described the morning the rent was raised to $6,000, the laughter that followed the betrayal in my father's eyes. I forced myself to hold steady when I recalled the door slamming the snow on my skin the moment I realized they wanted me erased. Across the room, Chloe shifted uncomfortably. Veronica's face was still, but her fingers tapped the table. My father kept staring down as if he could vanish into the floor. When I finished, Michael placed my mother's letter in front of me. I read her words aloud. "Protect this home, Hannah. They will try to take it from you." My voice shook, but the room was silent. For the first time, I felt my mother's presence fill the air like a shield. When I stepped down from the witness stand, my legs were weak, but inside I felt stronger than I ever had before. Michael's reassuring nod steadied me as I returned to my seat. Now it was their turn. Veronica's lawyer called her to the stand, and she walked with her head high, pearls gleaming at her neck. She sat down smoothly, crossing her legs as if she were at a luncheon instead of a courtroom. She began with a practiced smile, speaking of how she had taken me in after my mother's death, how she had fed and clothed me, how she had treated me as her own. Every word twisted the knife. She claimed the rent was simply to teach me responsibility, that the increase reflected the rising market. She even said that I was unstable, prone to exaggeration, that I had misunderstood her generosity. I clenched my fists, but Michael's calm expression reminded me to trust the process. Then came cross-examination. Michael rose slowly, his voice even. "Mrs. Blake, could you explain these loan documents?" He held up the bank records. Her smile faltered. She tried to spin a story about managing finances, but each page told otherwise luxury purchases, hidden debts. The mask began to crack. The judge leaned forward, his interest sharpened. Next, Michael asked, "And is it also your version of generosity to lock your stepdaughter outside in sub-zero weather?" Veronica stiffened. "I never—" Michael interrupted smoothly. "Our witness testified otherwise. Are you saying she lied under oath?" The courtroom buzzed with tension. Veronica sputtered, trying to recover, but the confidence she had carried in evaporated. Then Chloe was called. She slouched into the chair, arms crossed, eyes rolling. She admitted freely that she had mocked me, but insisted it was harmless, that I was too sensitive. When Michael pressed about the door being locked, she smirked. "Maybe I shut it a little hard." The jurors did not smile with her. Her arrogance hung in the air like smoke. Finally, my father was summoned. He walked slowly, shoulders heavy, eyes avoiding mine. When asked why he had allowed all of this, he muttered about keeping peace in the household, about trusting Veronica to handle things. His words sounded hollow even to himself. For the first time, I saw shame flicker across his face. Watching him sit there unable to defend what he had done, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and release. He had chosen his silence, and now the world could see it. The courtroom felt charged, every breath heavy with expectation. Veronica shifted in her seat. Chloe glared at me with open contempt, and my father sat slumped as though the weight of his silence had finally crushed him. Michael rose for his closing arguments. He walked slowly to the center of the room, papers in hand, his voice steady and deliberate. "This case is not about resentment. It is about truth. The truth is that Margaret Sullivan, before her passing, protected her daughter's future through legal means. The truth is that Hannah Sullivan is the rightful heir to her mother's share of the house. And the truth is that Veronica Blake not only ignored this, but exploited the property for personal gain, attempted to evict Hannah unlawfully, and allowed her daughter to subject Hannah to humiliation and cruelty." His words echoed off the walls. He placed the documents on the judge's bench, the signatures shining under the fluorescent lights. He continued, "This is not just about contracts. It is about the duty of family, the difference between guardianship and exploitation. We ask the court to uphold Hannah's rights and ensure that her mother's wishes are honored." The judge nodded, expression grave. Then, Veronica's lawyer stood, his tone sharp. He painted me as vindictive, said I was twisting grief into entitlement, that my stepmother had been nothing but supportive. He claimed the rent increase was business, not malice, that neighbors misinterpreted events. His words were polished, but I watched the jurors. Their faces remained hard. They had seen the documents, heard Mrs. O'Connor's testimony, listened to my mother's letter read aloud. No performance could erase that. When arguments ended, the judge announced a brief recess before delivering his decision. I stepped outside into the cold corridor, my knees trembling. Reporters lingered, their cameras flashing. Questions flew. "Hannah, do you think you will win? Is it true your stepmother locked you out in the snow?" I kept my head high, refusing to answer, remembering Michael's advice. "Let the court speak." Mrs. O'Connor squeezed my hand. "You have done all you can, dear. Now the truth is theirs to decide." We returned to the courtroom. My heart hammered so loudly I thought it might echo in the silence. The judge re-entered, robes flowing, and everyone rose. As we sat again, I gripped the edge of the table, bracing myself. The moment had come. Years of silence, months of cruelty, weeks of preparation, all leading to this. The judge's voice was calm, but carried the weight of stone. "I have reviewed the documents, presented the testimony given, and the history surrounding this case." His eyes flicked between me and Veronica. "It is clear that Margaret Sullivan ensured her daughter Hannah Sullivan would inherit her rightful portion of the family home. That trust cannot be ignored. Therefore, half the property is legally Hannah's, and any attempt to evict her is without foundation." A breath I had been holding for weeks escaped in a rush. The judge's tone sharpened as he continued. "Furthermore, the court finds troubling evidence of financial misconduct. Mrs. Blake, the loans taken against the property for personal gain, will be subject to further review. Chloe Blake's behavior, while not criminal, constitutes harassment, and the court recommends a restraining order to prevent further incidents. As for Mr. Sullivan, the court acknowledges his silence, but cannot penalize him beyond the civil matters at hand. Still, his inaction speaks volumes. The gavel struck. The case was decided. For a moment, the courtroom was utterly still. Then whispers broke out, reporters scribbling, neighbors exchanging glances. I felt the ground shift beneath me. Victory. Across the aisle, Veronica's face drained of color, her lips pressed into a thin line. Chloe muttered something under her breath, eyes blazing. My father sat frozen, his hands gripping the edge of the bench. He did not look at me. Michael leaned close, his voice quiet but filled with triumph. "You won, Hannah. Justice is yours." Mrs. O'Connor dabbed her eyes with a tissue, whispering, "Your mother would be so proud." I walked out of the courthouse into the cold Vermont air, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. How did it feel to win? "Do you have anything to say to your stepmother?" I paused on the steps, the sky pale above the snow crunching underfoot. I lifted my chin and spoke clearly. "Family should protect, not destroy." Today the truth was heard. That is all that matters. The crowd erupted with more questions, but I kept walking, the cold biting my cheeks, the weight of years finally lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in so long, I felt free. The battle was over. But the consequences for Veronica, Chloe, and even my father were only beginning. In the days after the ruling, the weight that had pressed on my chest for years began to loosen. Yet victory did not come quietly. The news spread quickly through Burlington. Neighbors who had once believed Veronica's polished lies now whispered about the truth revealed in court. At the hospital, co-workers stopped me in the halls offering hugs, quiet words of congratulations, even small gifts of encouragement. One nurse pressed a knitted scarf into my hands and said, "You deserved better all along, Hannah. Wear this and remember that you are not alone." I thanked her with tears in my eyes. Back at Mrs. O'Connor's home, the dining table that had been buried under documents was finally cleared. She served me tea and scones and said with a satisfied smile, "They cannot touch you now, dear." Your mother's voice won through you. Her words wrapped around me like a blanket. Still, the victory felt raw. I could not walk past my father's house without seeing the shadows of what had happened there. The windows seemed colder, the walls harsher, as if the house itself was ashamed of what it had become under Veronica's rule. Veronica herself vanished from public for a time, her smug confidence shattered. Whispers said she faced financial audit's creditors at her door, the glamorous life she built, crumbling piece by piece. Chloe, once bold and sneering, walked quickly through town, avoiding eye contact, her arrogance dissolved into embarrassment. As for my father, I saw him one evening outside the grocery store. He stood by his car, shoulders bent, a paper bag in his arms. For a moment, our eyes met. I waited for him to speak, to apologize, to say anything at all. Instead, he lowered his gaze and turned away. The silence that had once broken me now confirmed what I already knew: he had chosen his side long ago. And yet, despite the sting, I felt lighter. His silence no longer had the power to define me. I had my mother's house, my name on the papers, and a community that saw me clearly at last. That weekend, with Michael's guidance, I filed the official deed transfer. When I held the document with my name written firmly beside my mother's, a sob broke free. It was not just ink. It was proof that her voice, her care, her fight had not been erased. Standing in the snow outside the courthouse again, I whispered into the cold air, "We did it, Mom. We protected our home." The first week in my restored home felt both familiar and strange. Every corner still held my mother's touch, the faint scent of her lavender oil in the wood, the way the sunlight caught the ivy climbing the eastern wall, but it was as if the walls themselves exhaled, relieved to belong to someone who loved them again. I moved slowly through each room, touching the frames, straightening old photographs, whispering promises to keep the place alive with warmth. Yet the work ahead was heavy. Veronica's reckless spending had drained accounts and left unpaid bills stacked like threats in the mailbox. Contractors wanted their balances, and utilities showed months of neglect. For a brief moment, fear threatened to return. What if I couldn't keep up? What if winning in court only left me saddled with burdens too large to bear? That night, I sat with Mrs. O'Connor in her cozy living room, papers spread across her table once more. She adjusted her glasses, scanned the numbers, and said calmly, "It looks daunting, but it is not impossible. You have something they never did, Hannah. You have people ready to stand with you." Her faith steadied me. The very next morning, I posted a notice in the community center announcing a meeting for all tenants and neighbors. I braced for judgment, but when I stepped into the hall, nearly every chair was filled. Mrs. Rodriguez from down the street clasped my hand. Mr. Petrov, cane in hand, nodded firmly. Young families with toddlers on their laps listened with wide eyes. My voice shook at first as I explained the debts, the neglect, the reality left behind. But then I lifted the deed for all to see. This house, this land, it belongs to us now. Not just to me, but to all who have called it home. Murmurs spread, heads nodded. "We will repair together," I said. "We will protect it together." A cheer rose, small but strong, and I felt the building's spirit return through their voices. In the weeks that followed, we created a routine. Saturdays became repair days, neighbors fixing pipes, repainting walls, patching roofs. Evenings turned into planning sessions, residents volunteering skills I never knew they had. One retired carpenter rebuilt the porch. A young mother with accounting experience helped me balance the books. The home transformed not just structurally, but emotionally. Laughter filled the hallways where once there had been shouting. Children played freely in the yard, their boots stamping trails through the snow. I realized then that the house was never meant to be one person's possession. It was meant to be a vessel for community. My mother had always known this, and now I was finally living it. Each night as I locked the door, I felt the same rhythm in my chest, safety, belonging, purpose. For the first time in years, the future felt not like a burden, but like a promise waiting to unfold. Spring arrived slowly in Vermont, the snow retreating in patches and the first crocuses pushing through the thawed soil. With the change of season came a change in me as well. The scars of betrayal remained, but each day brought new layers of strength. I began rising earlier than usual, brewing my mother's old coffee and sitting by the window to watch the sunrise spread across the ivy wall. Those quiet mornings reminded me that healing was not a single moment, but a steady rhythm. News of the trial and its outcome still circulated around Burlington. Local papers had called it a case of courage, highlighting how one woman stood against her own family to preserve a home. Some reporters stopped me in the street asking for comments, but I often shook my head. This wasn't about headlines. I told them it was about people who needed a safe place to live. Yet the attention brought more than curiosity. A local church invited me to speak about community resilience. At first, I hesitated. Public speaking was never my strength. But standing at the wooden podium looking at faces young and old, I found my voice. I spoke about betrayal, about the night I stood shivering in the snow, about how a neighbor's kindness had saved me. I spoke about documents hidden in safety boxes, about justice, about the lesson my mother had whispered through her letters: protect this home. When I finished, the room rose in applause, not polite but genuine, like a shared heartbeat. Afterward, people approached with their own stories. A woman told me her brother had tried to steal her inheritance. A man whispered that his stepfather had once forced him out of the house he grew up in. They weren't just listening, they were connecting. The burden I had carried began to feel like a bridge to others who had walked through similar storms. Meanwhile, life at the hospital carried on. My coworkers respected me in a new way. They asked about repairs, offered contacts for grants, even donated supplies. One doctor, whose family owned a construction company, arranged for discounted materials. It struck me that the more I opened up, the more support flowed in. This was the opposite of Veronica's philosophy. She hoarded, deceived, controlled. I shared admitted weakness, and people responded with strength. One evening, as I walked home past Lake Champlain, I felt the wind sweep across the water, crisp and bracing. For years, I had thought survival meant keeping my head down, paying rent, quietly never asking for help. Now I understood survival could mean lifting your head, speaking truth, and letting others stand beside you. My stepmother and stepsister had tried to bury me under silence and fear. Instead, they had planted seeds I never expected, seeds of resilience, of community, of justice, rooted deeper than their cruelty could ever reach. By summer, the house stood transformed. Fresh paint brightened the walls, repairs strengthened the beams, and laughter carried through the rooms. Yet one piece of unfinished business remained: my parents. I had not seen my father since that awkward moment outside the grocery store. He lingered in the edges of my life like a ghost, never reaching out, never explaining. My stepmother Veronica was tangled in legal proceedings, her name whispered with disdain across town. Chloe drifted further into isolation, her friends fading as her reputation soured. Still, the wound left by my father's silence gnawed at me. One evening, Mrs. O'Connor found me sitting on the porch steps watching fireflies glow against the twilight. "You're thinking about him again, aren't you?" she said. I nodded. "He chose her over me, over the truth," I whispered. "But some part of me still wonders if he regrets it." Mrs. O'Connor laid her hand gently on mine. "Regret is his burden, not yours. You already carried enough." Her words settled deep, yet the ache lingered. Weeks later, a letter arrived in the mailbox with handwriting I recognized instantly. My father's. I hesitated for hours before opening it. Inside were only a few lines. "Hannah, I don't expect forgiveness. I see now the damage caused by my silence. I failed your mother's memory, and I failed you. I don't know if I can make it right, but I want to try. Love, Dad." The paper trembled in my hands. It wasn't an apology that erased the past, but it was a crack in the wall he had built. Still, I couldn't decide whether to respond. At the next community meeting, I shared the letter with Mrs. O'Connor. She studied it, then looked at me with steady eyes. "You have the choice now, Hannah. You don't owe him reconciliation, but if you want peace, maybe a conversation is worth it." After days of thought, I agreed to meet him. We sat at a cafe near the hospital, the silence between us thick. His face looked older, drawn by guilt and sleepless nights. He began slowly. "I let Veronica dictate my choices. I thought siding with her meant keeping peace, but all I did was abandon you." I sipped my coffee, my hands steady. "You didn't just abandon me. You betrayed Mom's memory too." He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I know, and I will carry that shame always. But I hope someday you'll let me stand beside you, even in small ways." The conversation didn't erase years of hurt, but it shifted something. For the first time in years, I saw not just the man who failed me, but the father who finally acknowledged the truth. As we left the cafe, he reached for my shoulder, lightly, hesitantly. I didn't pull away. The path to healing would be long, but perhaps it had finally begun. The autumn leaves in Vermont painted the streets gold and crimson when I finally understood the full circle of what had happened. It was not simply about winning the house or exposing Veronica's schemes. It was about choosing what kind of legacy I wanted to live and leave behind. The house my mother had entrusted to me was more than wood and stone. It had become a sanctuary, a place where people could depend on one another when the world turned cruel. To make that legacy permanent, I filed paperwork to create a community trust ensuring the house would never again fall into the hands of those who saw it only as profit. When the announcement was made, the community gathered in the yard beneath the ivy wall. Children played tag, neighbors shared casseroles, and Mrs. O'Connor gave a short speech that had everyone wiping tears. Hannah has shown us that home is not measured in square footage or market value. It is measured in safety, kindness, and courage. Applause echoed through the crisp air, and I felt my mother's presence as strongly as if she stood beside me, smiling with pride. My father attended that day too, sitting quietly at the edge of the gathering. When I caught his eye, he gave a small nod. It was not redemption, but it was recognition. That alone felt like a door left open for the future. Veronica and Chloe had drifted entirely from our lives, their names mentioned only in whispers. I no longer carried the bitterness I once did. They had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. My path was heavier, yes, but it was also brighter, filled with meaning. That evening, as the last of the neighbors left, I lingered by the porch. The ivy swayed in the cool breeze, just as it had the day my mother told me to protect this home. I traced my fingers over the leaves and whispered, "We did it, Mom." We turned pain into purpose. I walked through the house, pausing at each room now alive with life again. The kitchen hummed with the smell of baked bread from Mrs. Rodriguez. The living room carried the echoes of children laughing during chess lessons with Mr. Petrov. Upstairs, the new tenants, a young couple just starting out, painted their walls a warm blue. Each corner breathed the truth my mother had always known, that home is not about possession, but about preservation. Before bed, I wrote in my journal a habit I had started since the trial. I wrote, "Family is not always the one we are born into. Sometimes it is the one we build when others stand beside us through the storm. Sometimes it is neighbors who pull us from the snow or strangers who become protectors of a dream." I closed the journal, turned off the light, and for the first time in years, I slept deeply. The war was over and justice had been served. But more than that, love had taken root where cruelty once tried to grow.